Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 13, a deeper look into socialization. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. My name's Mariano, that's Brent, and we thank you guys so much for sticking with us, and we love all the support that we've been seeing for our Deeper Look series. So for this episode, episode 13, we're going to keep things going. It's going to be a deeper look into socialization. Now, before we dive in, you can find us on Instagram. You can find me at Untamed Dog Co. That's Untamed Dog Co. All one word. You can find Brent at Canis Behavior. That's Canis Behavior. All one word. So with that, let's dive right in. Over to you, Brent.
What is up, Mariano? It has been a whole week since I've seen you again, and I still miss you every single time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, man, it's all good. We've had a chance to talk more this week, so that's pretty good.
I know, but I want to see that face. If you guys don't know what Mariano looks like, if you guys are watching on podcast, he's a handsome fella. Sometimes he's just really easy on the eyes, really good to look at. But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about, guys. Today we are talking about, we could talk about it, but
go ahead.
That would take hours. Anyways, today we are going to be covering the subject of socialization and kind of what it is, what people think it is, again, the science behind it, the studies behind it, the good and the bad practices of it all. Honestly, let's go ahead and start the same way we start every Talk Pinky. Let's talk about what we see as dog trainers commonly to be the public perspective. Okay, so let's go. What is the public perspective of socialization in regards to dog ownership, dog training, or dog ownership? What would you say, Mariano?
I would say that a big thing in terms of public perspective that I've noticed with socialization, and especially in the past 3 days, I've been getting a lot of calls regarding this exact thing. Mm-hmm. Everybody understands why it's important to socialize your dog, but almost no one seems to understand that context matters. And I'll put it this way. We have somebody will give us a call and say, okay, so here's the deal. I've had the dog since she was 3 months old, and I brought her everywhere, socialized her, cars, people, bikes, you name it. She was always great. She's now 7 months old, and 3 weeks ago, she just started growling at people. I don't know what it is. I thought I socialized her right and everything else. And, and barring some of the other variables, breeding and what the household and routine and all that could look like, I try to make clear to people, here's one possibility. It's possible that you kind of over socialize the dog. And that's not to say you shouldn't bring your dog out and let them meet and interact with things. But a lot of times I see people with a new puppy, a younger puppy, because 3 months, we're talking a young dog, and so they're so cute and they're so malleable that people just really take liberties. Oh, can I pet him? Can I hold him? Can I whatever, and for the owner is sure, the answer is always yes, because they think they're doing the right thing with socializing, but it's easy to overdo it. And it's your dog's getting tossed around like a hot potato. And so they get annoyed, and what I try to explain to people is finally your dog's old enough to be enough. And that's what they're saying. And I think it's worth noting that now that they have this, this kind of annoyed connotation toward people, and it's ugh, is this person going to be all in my face again?
Right. It's
not that you should stop socializing, because you shouldn't. It's that you need to adjust the lens from which your dog is viewing this stuff. So
also to add to that, it's like the dog feeling abused versus feeling socialized or interacted with.
Exactly.
Right? I think this idea, so to kind of go to where this mentality came from. So, mind you, it's important to handle our dogs. It's important for people to hold our dogs. It's important for people to, be introduced to our dogs. All of these things are important. These are not the things. But I get what you're saying when it gets too far, where it gets to the point where the dog's actually not enjoying it, but is too young to really express that he's not enjoying it. I think that's a really good thing to talk about, because there are so many dogs that do show insecurities later in life, or they were over socialized, or their version of socialization, what the people thought were good practices, were actually the bad versions. And we'll break that down in the bad versus the good practices of socialization, because there is a fine line. And we'll give you guys some tips on what we recommend to be better socialization skills. Some of the public stuff that I want to talk about is like one thing that I commonly see is that people have this idea that socialization means playing with, right? Or to play with dogs or to play with humans, which part of socialization is interacting, but so many times, like in a training session, I'll tell someone, your dog actually suffers from lack of socialization, and then their quick draw response is like, oh no, I take him to daycare all the time, or no, he plays with dogs all the time, right? And so sometimes there's a little bit of a confusion of sometimes we have to separate socialization with people, socialization with places, socialization with other animals. So there's a little bit of confusion in the public perspective there.
What I think, it's not so much confusion as it is just oversimplification.
Right.
Like what I was getting at was they just don't take into account context. It's just like, oh yeah, well I let him play. There was no like, was it too much? Was it not enough? And I think with the daycare thing too, they almost see it as like a check mark or a box that they check off. It's like, yep, socialize my dog. Yep, do that. Daycare, that's done.
Check.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see, a couple other public perspective things. People associate socialization with playing. So as long as the dog is having a good time or is in a playful manner, then they think they're properly socializing. When we talk about, things of desensitization, I know people kind of people know that sometimes dogs are scared of things, right? Like vacuums, skateboards, bicycles, certain buses, all those things. And sometimes in the public perspective, it's not necessarily looked at as those things. Sometimes it's looked at as fear, or it's looked at as, the dog needs, the dog sometimes is reactive. Like the other day, I was walking a lady with her corgi down the street, and now this dog notoriously has a barking issue. Like he's a very vocal dog. He sees a dog, he barks. He sees a person he likes, he barks. And in this scenario, she was kind of getting fed up with it. We actually walked by a trash bag filled with leaves, and that trash bag filled with leaves moved when the wind blew, and the dog turned around and barked at it. She was like, see, I told you he barks. And I was like, yeah, but in this context, he was scared out of his mind of this trash bag filled with leaves that was a weird shape. It was made an awkward sound. And so he was pretty scared. So sometimes in public perspective, people understand the concepts, but they don't necessarily know how to best practice them. Because it takes a lot of time to do it. Right. What other misconceptions we see in public perspective when it comes to socialization?
I think another one is people sometimes feel the need to like jam it down a dog's throat if it's not super necessary. Like I've met
like a rescue or something.
Yeah, well, and especially with something like I've met dogs that were afraid of things that are like reasonable, like the garbage truck, something really loud and huge, and it's like, all right, well, I get that, and really, how often are you going to see that, and people have kind of made it a point to like, yeah, so I sit him outside. In fact, just the other day, I did a lesson where their dog is a social dog, playful, humans, dogs, everything, like a puppy with a very kind of bubbly temperament to him. But there's this one dog in particular that they were like, he just goes off every time he sees this dog. And we go for a walk. We see this dog. It's like a giant, like bully breed behind some short fence who just barks at him all day long. And so he was like, I've been trying to sit him in front of the fence and get him to relax. And I'm like, why? Just go for your walk. I mean, again, that's like, if you're making him do something he doesn't like, he's not just going to turn around and like it. You're just making him do something he doesn't like over and over again. Right.
And there is a time and a place that you pick that battle, but there's not enough foundation in the dog's under the dog's belt to actually be able to win that battle. Right. A majority of the time. Other public perspective that I see is very common. Let's say in theory, if a dog does lack socialization, let's say there's a rescue dog who someone says like one thing is like the sentiment that I need to socialize the dog who's not been socialized his whole life, right? So if there's a dog who is reactive towards other animals, or if there's a dog who necessarily gets defensive around other animals, sometimes people think the logic is, well, you know what he needs? More animals, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the logic of like, You don't like going to parties. You know what you need more of?
Right. Go to
More
more parties.
go
Right.
to more parties, right? And then you'll get over it. So sometimes it's the simplification of desensitization and kind of classical conditioning and stuff like that. So cool. So we see kind of like play is a public perspective. People think socialization has to do with play.
Mm-hmm.
People think socialization has to do with kind of just forcing the dog to get over things and get used to it. What else? Sometimes it's what
It's
did I just?
oversimplified.
It is oversimplified. It's not broken down into its component pieces for people to really
Right.
digest. So hopefully we could do that today. I think that'd be good.
Yeah, definitely. So when we want to talk about the trainer's perspective, what we want to do is try to frame our version of what we think socialization and all things that are involved with that entail in a way that's kind of digestible for people. So let me give this a quick shot here and then you can dive right in.
Cool.
So right from the beginning, from a trainer's perspective, something that I notice about socialization is in order to work around people's kind of, people's like tendency to oversimplify, I try to be clear from the jump that socialization is a moving target that kind of depends from dog to dog what exactly they need. And I think a good point that you made just a second ago was people, for example, think play is social time or whatever the case. And it very well may be, I guess, depending on the situation. And I'll give an example here in a bit. But here's an example of where maybe play isn't the proper way to socialize because sometimes proper socialization doesn't necessarily mean the dog wants to be super friendly with every single person on the block. Sometimes it just means we're traveling and I don't want you reacting or nervous, but I just need you to do what I need you to do. Right.
Right.
Like a working dog or whatever the case. So if you have like a really boisterous puppy who thinks it's their job to go and pull to, for positive reasons to go and interact with every dog and person they see, that's still not good socialization, but for a very different reason than if we had, say, a dog that was like deathly afraid of motorcycles and garbage trucks and things like that.
Right.
So I'll just give a quick example and then I'll let you jump right in here. So
Cool.
I've got another foster dog, and this one again is feral, trapped like in a trap. He was hanging out with us with the rescue that I work with. He was with them for a couple weeks, and he's a very very actually dog social friendly kind of puppy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's interesting. He comes up to people and he's excited to see you, tail wagging. But the second you move to touch him, he's gone. And if you put a leash on him, he bites right through it. Try to put him in a crate, he's not having it. So he definitely had his like issues to him. And so we finally got him here to the house. I got him in a crate, got him on a leash, and he's doing well. It's been like 10 days now. So his socialization process is going to look very different than the board and train puppy who I've got coming in a few days. He needs to learn how to open up. The puppy's already open, and I want to keep it that way, but she needs to learn how to dial it back. It's all about finding that happy medium.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I really like that analogy. It's a moving target.
Right. It is.
It is a moving target because the movement is age development. The movement is the way the dog reacts to different stimulus. It makes it harder to hit it on a bullseye. But yeah, no, I think that's a really great perspective. Some of the perspectives that I have when it comes to dog socialization and the requirements, right? There isn't as we talked about many times before, there isn't a one size fits all standard to what dog socialization should be,
right?
Because it really depends on context, right? So like if you live in the mountains or have acreage and you have a dog or two dogs, like the amount of socialization you need there is very different than if you live in an apartment building with 60 other dogs. Right. So socialization has in essence to do what your standard and what your context is. Right. So usually what we see, dogs who live more urban or suburban lifestyles, these dogs require more socialization. Right. These dogs have to be more social because they're constantly in they're running into more people, more dogs, more distractions, more strange human type living. Makes sense. Mm-hmm. Versus if a dog lives in the hills and the mountains on a ranch, the amount of socialization that the dog needs is very different. Now, one thing across the board that is really, really important is that we need to make sure that dogs are very heavily socialized with human beings, right? Doesn't necessarily mean they have to love every human being, but at least the dog needs to learn friend, foe, to discriminate, to be able to see, what's going on. Because at the end of the day, there's many dogs who can live a happy life never going to the dog park because they live a life with humans. But it's as soon as dogs cross the line of showing human aggression, that their lives actually get in risk, right? They start having a risk and a liability in regards that can affect the dog's livelihood.
Right.
So human socialization is one of the most important things. Veterinary behaviorist and dean of dog training, Ian Dunbar, he's quoted to say, an unsocialized dog is far more dangerous to humans than a wild wolf or a wolf in the wild. Right. And so that kind of seems like, well, that's kind of far-fetched. Like, what do you mean by that? Well, what he means is, when it comes to this different species of a wolf to a dog, a wolf keeps far, far away from humans, right? Like if a wolf smells a human, downwind, they're gone. Mm-hmm. They don't fuck with humans. Versus a dog has genetic predisposition to want to bond with people, right? So if I have a dog who's unsocialized, who is attracted towards human beings and bonding with human beings, well, he might like one, he might like two human beings, but he'll have no problem telling the other human beings he doesn't like that he doesn't like them, right? So in that context, Ian Dunbar saying that an unsocialized dog is a greater threat to people than a wild wolf.
Yeah,
right?
Because at that point, we're talking about the potential for just, like a crime of
human interaction.
Right, the dog is just around. And so, of course, like if you have two things that don't mesh in the same vicinity, now we're playing with fire a little bit. So yeah, I agree with that. Whereas a wolf knows we don't do this, and they do what they need to do in order to avoid, because they know the hole in their game is there.
Yeah, they exactly. It's very black and white and with their behaviors.
Right.
So the reason I want to bring up context is because, as you mentioned, it's a moving target. Different personalities need different things. I guess an easy way to look at it, dogs who are very exuberant and dogs who are very engaging with the environment need to kind of learn manners, right? They need to learn limits. They need to learn patience. They need to learn self-control. And all of these things are prerequisites to what we'll talk about later, which we call social skills, right? So if you think of even human social skills, saying please and thank you, sharing, teamwork, problem solving, all of these things only exist if we have self-control, patience, right? So if a dog doesn't have that, their socialization career falls very short very quickly. So factors of, what our lifestyle is really important. Also factors of what our dog's predispositions are. So if our dogs are hypersensitive, so we see some dogs on the spectrum who are literally more sensitive. They feel things more, they hear things better, they see things better, they smell things stronger. It's easier for dogs like that to become overwhelmed. So if we have a dog who easily gets overwhelmed, this dog usually requires a little bit more desensitization, a lot more exposure. And in essence, we have to kind of isolate certain weaknesses with that dog just to help them survive in whatever world it is that they're living in, right? To just help them cope and deal with it. Versus if we have a dog who's fearless and engages with the world no matter what, right? He could see the scariest thing in the world and want to play with it, like my dog. Sometimes we have to teach them limits, because on both sides of the spectrum, from the very overwhelmed and introverted and sensitive side to the very engaging, assertive, confident side, and everything in between, socialization is really about balancing through different stages of development, through the puppy's developmental fear stages, and through the dog's hormonal shifts, right? That's just like trying to keep a child well-mannered for the first 18 years of his life. It's a struggle for parents. It's definitely a struggle. But I would say, and I want to pass this over to you, the struggle is really the struggle is not a struggle if we make it a point to have influence over our dogs.
Yeah, like if this makes sense, the struggle is less of a struggle when you don't try to put like a hard line of control on it and kind of understand that it is a moving target and just flow with it. And what I mean is, because I don't want to sound like weird and abstract and not helpful. So what I mean is, much like when we talked in our last episode about balanced training, socialization just in and of itself, it's kind of one piece of the dog training puzzle, but when you dissect it deeper, there's lots of elements to it. So absolutely, you're totally right about the dog's surroundings matter. If a dog is out in the country and their next neighbor's 60 acres away, then it's kind of a different story than if we're like living in LA, right in downtown, people all over the place. Also, even if we have two people living in LA, same circumstance, but maybe the people's expectations are different. Let's say one of them wants a protection dog, one of them wants a puppy, one of them, that makes a difference. And then, of course, there's, like we talked about in the past, ages and stages, they change so much. I mean, the way that you socialize a 6-month-old dog can be quite different than that exact same dog at a year and a half, 2 years old, because their behaviors and their mannerisms and understandings of the world will just be different. Therefore, their reactions will be different accordingly. So you have to look at things. I kind of think of it like a camera lens, where it's just like glass, 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 and the lights like kind of moving around all the way through. And so you kind of figure out like you're looking at things through a series of different like viewpoints and trying to mesh them up as best you can, and understand that all the while they're going to keep moving, so you keep moving with it. And as far as I can tell, that's been my most accurate and effective way, at least thus far, to think of it kind of in my own head as I find a way to describe it to clients.
Right. Let me go and take a stab at just breaking down my component pieces to socialization. So hopefully it helps people kind of put things in boxes. So one part of socialization is exposure, right? Exposing dogs to environments, people, sounds, and in essence, putting the dog within an environment that allows them to get used to certain stimulus. And ideally, this environment should be something, that the dog would run into commonly, right? So exposure is going to be really important. The second thing is teaching interactions, right? And I think one of the subcategories to interactions, we need to make sure we have the ability to influence our dog's self-control, right? So think of it like with our parents. When we were really little, we were taught manners, right? So we were taught to say please and thank you. We were taught to wait our turn. We were taught to, if we don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. So all of these little manners that we were taught when we were kids, in essence, were meant to teach us to control some of our animalistic or emotional tendencies, right, as children. And the more that we exercise them, the better we are with them with maturity and as we grow up to be adults. But that's part of interactions. So definitely having self-control, teaching the dog to have self-control to be able to teach them how to properly interact with things. And so interactions is really important. And I think the last one we'll talk about is, interactions itself can actually be broken up into dogs and with humans, right? So anything, different living creatures, because definitely the way dogs play is going to be very different than the way dogs play with humans, right? So teaching those two things are really important. And then as a final, we'll talk about, species specific manners, right? So like, for example, a dog can jump on another dog, but if a dog jumps on a human, it's a very different story, right? So teaching the dog the time and the place and the context in which they can be a certain way versus not be a certain way, right? And I think this is always hard because when socializing dogs, we have to teach them to still be a dog and also understand what humans want from them. So we want a dog who's half dog, half human a majority of the time. If we live in a very urban or suburban populated area where they're going to run into a lot of dogs and a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely, and it's funny because we hear this a lot. I just let my dog be a dog. Mm-hmm. And the only thing about that is, that I take issue with is it's just too vague. Because to let a dog be a dog, well, what does that mean? I mean, okay, let's say that your dog is a dog who plays. Okay, that's fine. Does he play with other dogs? Cool. Does he play with you? Cool. Does he play with your grandma? Maybe not so cool. Does he play, does he play with a 4-year-old, lick him and knock him over and stuff like that? So context matter, because you were absolutely right. Earlier you talked about, in order for there to be civil society, with courtesy and just understandings of how to play nice together, you do have to know when it's time to turn up the energy, like, and play and have fun and, and set boundaries and things like that. But also you do have to learn how to dial it back too. And it is a complex dance, but dogs are totally capable of learning it. In fact, they're so good at it that I think among all the other animals in the world, that's, in my opinion, why dogs are the ones that have just integrated with us so completely, because they get it. They know how to work it. And sometimes they need a little help understanding, but maybe what I should say is, they're absolutely capable with the right coaching.
100%. 100%. I really agree. I think getting, and this is where socialization in itself has a spectrum, or it has different scales for different people. So let's dive into some bad practices. What are some bad practices that you've seen And we're going to bring up the bad ones so we can bring up the good ones.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and do it. What are some bad practices you think?
Here we go. Bad practices. Client of mine, if you hear this, I love you, and it's all good because we're going to fix this, okay? If your dog takes issue with another dog on the walk in a yard, don't sit him there in front of that other dog that's barking away and like force him to sit there in patience.
Right.
You know, what we've talked about before, but people don't understand this. They're either gung ho about it this way or that way. And the bad practice is, don't feel like the dog has absolutely no say in anything ever. They should, but the key is to find a happy medium. So the bad practice is, my dog should never, have any sort of reaction to any dog ever. Like, and I'm like, okay, fine, that's fair. But like, why don't you just walk across the street?
Yeah. Yeah. Where they get too they get too micromanagey on the behavior, or they
Right.
or they sometimes forget your animal is a living, breathing, feeling creature, right?
Right.
And I think that's something really important. There was an explanation talking about aggression, and sometimes dogs have good natures, but they have circumstantial aggression, right?
Mm-hmm.
So circumstantial could be, for humans, it happens all the time. The analogy was, if there is a pastor who's late for his Sunday sermon and on his way to church, someone cuts him off, he'll probably get upset and angry, even though he's on his way to give his Sunday sermon, So circumstantial aggression is like, there are some situations our dogs are good people or good dogs, but occasionally they might show circumstantial aggression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that aggression doesn't necessarily make them bad or evil or anything like that. But just like any other living creature, we have the propensity to not like something as well, right? So sometimes a game in socialization is teaching our dogs to have interest in things that maybe they don't, right?
Yeah, and to kind of follow up with that point, circumstantial aggression. I think that another bad practice that I see in dog training is just short-sightedness for socialization. And what I mean is, if the dog has circumstantial aggression and they try to hammer that down at all costs, it's possible that you can do it, but what are we going to be losing? And my example again, I'd go back to, like, if you force that dog, I mean, we could, I suppose, try. I won't, so, but just anybody listening, like, I guess you could try theoretically to sit the dog there and force him, eat collar, prong collar, food, whatever, to get him to not react. And however long it takes, you could do it, but if you do that, your dog ain't going to trust you. So possibly, yeah. So like, you took a step forward to take a few backwards. And that's where you have to be kind of, understanding of the overall picture. The key is to get a dog to be able to walk on a leash or whatever the situation is, because those vary, in a manner that's efficient and safe and effective. And that doesn't mean lunging at anybody. It doesn't mean jumping on everybody either.
And also something that doesn't tarnish like the trust in the relationship between you and your dog, right? Because dogs are keeping score. Like, they see us put them in fucked up situations and they remember it. And I remember when I was a kid, we had a dog, Ralph. He was an Australian cattle dog. He was really sweet. Loved him to death. And he hated one of our other dogs growing up. And my brother, till this day, he regrets it. And he's all like, he said, the first fight that these two dogs ever got into, he told Ralph to stop and lay down. And he did. Like, he listened perfectly. Mm-hmm. Well, the other dog, who wasn't trained, took advantage of him and bit him. Mm-hmm. And my brother goes, he never trusted me after that time. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm not going to listen to you. I gotta fend for myself. Yeah. Then again, we were kids and the dogs weren't trained that well, but at least they had a little bit of that rapport. But yeah, I think that's important as well. Like, sometimes if we put dogs in bad situations, they are trusting us to continue to not make them uncomfortable and things like that. So, however, even though in socialization, a little bits of stress are important so that dogs can get over it, we do have to have a better gauge of knowing when it's overboard or it's too much for that dog.
Exactly.
Right. Let's see. So I guess bad practice or broken trust, dogs who aren't ready for certain levels of socialization, right? So as we talked about before, people who take their dogs who've never socialized before with other dogs and they stuff them in a dog park filled with other dogs. This has the potential to go bad really quickly. And the reason for that, it's because usually the dog doesn't have the social skills to be able to survive that event or to have an enjoyable time, right? The key with socialization is how can we expose the dog with enough frequency, or leaving him with the right emotional taste in his mouth to be able to want to experience that again or not be fearful of experiencing that again.
Right.
Let's see. Other bad practices that I see in dog socialization. When dog owners think that socialization has to do with play and interaction, people forget that socialization also has to involve you as the owner, as the caretaker of the dog. So many times people are so proud that their dog plays with all these dogs at the dog park. But guess what? If you tried to intervene and tell your dog to stop, he wouldn't listen to you, right? Or you ask him to come, he won't listen to you. And the reason that becomes a problem over time is because at the dog park, the dog has learned my owner is going to sit on the bench for 30 minutes and not pay attention to me, so I don't have to listen to anyone for 30 minutes, right? And so in the case where the dog gets in a fight, or there's a dog who shouldn't be in the dog park that starts an altercation with your dog, or your dog gets into trouble or starts eating something or stealing stuff, if you don't practice being an active part of your dog's socialization experience, in essence being your dog's referee, it's not healthy for your relationship with the dog. So, and I think honestly, your relationship with the dog is what allows our dogs to have a very long social career with other dogs and other humans.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I think, so much of it just falls I mean, I guess this makes perfect sense, but so much of it just falls down to what people think of socialization. And it's exactly this. It's, when we look at, I'm going through the list as you're talking right now of bad practices, and it's, people are short-sighted, they're simplified, they don't understand why it's important to put your dog in situations in which they can flourish. If you put them in unreasonable circumstances, they're going to lose trust for you. And, it needs to involve you. And so, yeah, definitely. I mean, these things all, it's funny when we talk about it in a sense, and then we kind of come full circle and it still makes sense. It's like checking your work. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Do you want to move on to some good practices?
Let's do it.
All right. So some good practices as I see it, and I'm kind of framing these as fixes in direct response to these bad practices. Okay. So a way to avoid being short-sighted and kind of taking a step forward and drawing that hard line with, no, my dog must do this at all costs, without realizing what you're giving up for that, is to seek out, a trainer who's really good with socialization, who can help you understand the complete context of what exactly that is: desensitization, socialization, interaction, proper mannerisms, and just helping you understand, like we've said earlier in the podcast, that of course, I want my dog to be, and I tell people this a lot, I want my dog to be, to have positive association, or at the very least, neutral association with what exactly is happening. If we're walking down the street, you don't have to love everybody, just walk. I just don't want you afraid of anybody. But again, it all depends on context. I want my dogs to be able to play if that's what the time calls for. I want them to be able to tune out and relax if that's what the time calls for. And having that kind of fluid idea, and it's ever changing, just like training itself, and just like the dog in and of themselves as they grow and evolve. I think that that's one thing that will make us much better in terms of understanding how to properly socialize our dogs. Another thing is looking at the big picture. It kind of ties into that last point, but it's a little different in that, understand when we talk about trust and really what the goal of socialization is, to develop positive associations and develop trust, and and just good vibes all around, so that the dog is able to function under whatever distraction they're dealing with, be it people in the city, tractors in the country. It's a matter of horses. Yeah, some dogs are afraid of horses. Water, so if you want your dog, like you just for whatever reason think your dog just really should swim, you really want him to swim, don't just toss him in the pool one day, because not only are you going to scare him out of the water, you're going to make him second guess you in other contexts.
Right.
So that was an overall loss for you, a big one, I would say, and so be willing to give a little. If the dog's not a swimming dog, all right, fine, no big deal. If your dog's not a daycare dog, all right, fine, no big deal. We'll find workarounds for these things, but you do have to kind of meet your dog in the middle. There are certain things I expect out of them in terms of, like we've talked about in society, I need certain manners, certain behavior, certain, social cues. I can't have you lunging and things like that, but I'm going to help you out. And If you don't want to be pet by people, I won't let people pet you. If you don't want to be around other dogs, I won't let their dogs near you. And it's our job kind of to be a bit of a parent in that regard.
Mm-hmm. It's important for people to really know um, animal behavior and animal development, right? Which is not common knowledge because it's not out there super digestible and it's not a societal common sense, right? So, running a daycare for 10 years, it's very common. We see dogs at certain ages start what we call graduating from daycare, right? Which in essence means the social venue that that dog has no longer fits that dog, right? So I've seen dogs that as soon as they're fully vaccinated, they come into daycare and they have friends and they play and they have a good time. But what happens is with the way that they're raised at home, with their personalities and characteristics that, are genetic and part of their personality that gets developed, eventually there becomes a time where I would say 70 to 80% of dogs who start in daycare around 4 months, they phase out of daycare by the age of 3. Right. And so that sounds weird. And a lot of my clients, they look at this as like the dog is all of a sudden becoming unsocial. But in reality, all that's happening is the dog is growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so some of the things that we would run into all the time is the dog who is a common daycare goer, who would come 5-6 days a week, all of a sudden started getting in fights or picking on younger puppies or whatever, or started taking control of the yard, whatever it was. And this is bound to happen, right? Because dogs get older. And just like humans, there was an age where I really liked to party and I liked to go to clubs and I liked to have fun and I liked to dance. And that was my version of a good time. And then nowadays, in my 30s, I like to be home and watch a movie, or I like to drink some wine, or I like to, do stuff like that. So what I find fun or how I want to spend my energy shifts as the dog gets a little bit older as well. And I think people need to give their dogs room to allow that to happen. So as dogs start to become less about dogs and just like humans, they become more family oriented. They want to spend more time at the house. They want to spend more time with the humans, spend more time with the kids. They rather sleep more throughout the day versus have to go to daycare every day. So that's something really, really important. Just know that your dogs, if you've done a good job by socializing your dog from the time that they were young, and if you've developed control over your dog, meaning you can get them to calm down, you can get them to come back, you maintain their focus around other animals, right? That's really all the basics you really need. Mm-hmm. Then we should be able to, then we should have been able to shape and mold our dog's social career up to those points. And if your dog can't go to daycare anymore, it doesn't mean your dog's a bad dog. It just means the daycare is not his scene anymore.
Right.
So maybe that's where dog parks come into play, or maybe that's where play dates come into play, right? It doesn't mean your dog's social career has to go away.
Yeah, pack walks or something.
It might just have to transform into something else.
Right.
Something that interests him or her.
You might even say it's a moving target.
What? Did you say that? Did you say the movie target thing again? It's true. But as long as you keep trying to hit it and you stay dynamic with the dog, socialization is honestly something that you continue to do for the whole dog's life. But again, it depends on what your lifestyle requires, right? There will be a time the dog that goes to the dog park every single day won't need to go every single day. He'll be happy with twice a week, right? But that dog and you have to make those calls. But I think sometimes dogs are held too much to the standard of being perfect. They can't show attitude. They can't show aggression. They can't be reactive. In essence, we want our dogs to be saints and be perfect all the time, when even us as humans who are civilized, well-mannered, we can't guarantee that we're not going to get angry or in a fight sometime today. Right. We can't guarantee that. So it's a little unfair sometimes with the dogs.
Yeah. Well, context matters. Again, context matters. Sometimes, I don't want to give off the wrong message, but sometimes, let's say like in self-defense, it can be appropriate. It all just depends on what exactly the full picture looks like. And it's just hard because humans largely get to kind of dictate that for themselves. I mean, to an extent, like we have laws and things, but those were written by other humans who, whereas dogs are kind of, their context is largely dictated by people, even from a legal standpoint. Even if your dog is like legally, or rather, if your dog is like ethically, let's say, in the right, legally they're not. And there's lots of stuff there to chew on, and it's definitely a dense topic. But I would say overall, look for the look at things in as close to you can in the light of like a parent. Is my
Mhm.
dog technically right? Yeah, maybe he is. Maybe he is right to be annoyed with this other dog. Maybe he is right to be nervous of this person or whatever the case. But as a parent, isn't it kind of my job to be like, look, I hear what you're saying and everything. I'm not upset with you, but this
Yeah,
is not healthy. I'm just telling you. So let's do something
yeah.
else instead. And
You set your dogs up for success.
exactly, right, for
Socialization.
real long-term success,
Yeah.
and sometimes that means kind of playing peacekeeper. Sometimes that means playing keep
Mhm.
away and just don't.
It means pick your dog's friends.
Right.
Pick your dog's friends. Oh, we have to add this to bad practices. I'm sorry, man. Let's rewind. Adding this to bad practices. Bad practices is people letting their dogs meet on leash, on walk, in passing.
Oh yeah.
That's
Yeah.
bad practice, people. Like, it might seem cute and might turn out great a couple times, but there's always going to be that time that other dog lunges or growls at your dog. Bottom line, every professional agrees dogs socialize better off of a leash.
God, and you know what too? Like, yeah, with that being said, a huge bad practice that I just saw the other day and I see all the time, like especially like Runyon Canyon, stuff like that when I was in LA, was if your dog is social, great. If your dog is like perfectly capable of walking up to a leashed dog because they're off leash and
Mm-hmm,
be friendly, great. That doesn't mean that other dog is friendly. Don't
mm-hmm.
let your off leash dog go and harass other people's dogs. You don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't matter if your dog's friendly. If
Right.
you could provoke the other dog to be bad.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing is we have to look at it like we let our dogs do things that we would never let our human children do ever. And we do it because we go, well, they're dogs. You're right. They are dogs and they do have dog instincts. However, they live in a human world
Mhm.
and they will constantly be judged by human standards,
Mhm.
no matter what you think. So if you don't have control over your dog, get control over your dog. If your dog lacks socialization, figure out a safe protocol and ways to get that dog more socialized. If your dog is scared of things, figure out a proper protocol to desensitize those dogs. But most importantly, if you guys have a puppy, make sure you socialize the hell out of that dog. And what we mean by do it in a balanced way,
Mhm.
right? Don't over socialize. Don't under socialize. Your dog having dogs at home does not count as socialization. Socialization has to do with how you interact with strangers that are not your family, right? I have so many clients that go, oh, I have 3 dogs at home. My dog's well socialized. Having siblings and making friends are 2 different things,
Mhm.
right? And so I would just tell people, that these are some of the basic things to really just consider when socializing. But most importantly, if you have a puppy, anything before the age of 18 weeks, it's super important for you to socialize your dog with humans and other animals or other dogs before 18 weeks. If you guys can do that, you guys save your puppy a huge risk of bad lack of socialization behavior, right? Aggression, reactivity. Get your dog socialized before the age of 18 weeks, which sometimes is contradicted by what our vets tell us to do, right? Your vet will tell you with good reason because they have their own points, but realistically, depending on where you live, your vet will tell you don't let your dog out of the house before he's fully vaccinated. The average dog is not fully vaccinated until about 4 to 4.5 months. So that means for those 18 weeks, your dog was kept inside and not exposed to anything. And by the time your dog is exposed to stuff outside, your dog is going to be scared out of his mind. So we have to have workarounds, right? There's been such a huge feud between veterinarian advice and dog behavior advice. Your dog has to be exposed to humans and other animals before the age of 18 weeks, or else the window closes. Usually after 18 weeks, there's something called a fear stage. And that fear stage is where your dog starts discriminating friend or foe. Who's my family? Who's a friend? Who should I be scared of? Who should I not? That fear stage usually lasts about 2 to 3 weeks. But the way that we manage our dogs before that fear stage and during that fear stage really lays down a lot of groundwork for the rest of the dog's childhood. So really important. Just want to give you guys a little bit of the science behind it all.
Yeah, it's got a certain trajectory to it,
Yeah.
right? And like a level of expectation that you can try to gauge given what the dog's socialization looked like during that critical time period in the dog's development. Absolutely. So just to give people a bit of practical advice as to what some of this looks like. Dogs typically aren't fully vaccinated till like 4.5-ish months, but and again, yes, be careful. Yes, take precautions. I don't want anybody's dogs getting hurt. It's just you guys have to understand everything is when we talk about context, again, every decision has its consequence. And I would rather get my dog like, most of his shots and be careful, and just avoid things that would otherwise up their risk of contracting something from another dog, let's say.
Yeah, pretty much keep your dog away from grass and dirt where
Yeah,
other dogs poop and pee on. You'll be
right.
fine.
Right. And that comes with a risk, yes, but so does not socializing your dog.
Yeah,
And
I think
so
it comes with a bigger risk, to be very honest.
right. And a bigger, potentially a bigger risk to the dog too, because what happens to dogs who bite?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so I think a great way to do it, like in practical terms, if you've got a really young puppy, consider bringing them with you places in like a travel crate. They can be
Mhm,
with you, they're there, people can say hi to them and stuff here and there, but when they're not feeling it, they're not feeling it. Don't force the dog.
mhm.
That's good balanced socialization. When we talk about if you do want to introduce dogs together, because letting random dogs meet together on leash is like almost never a good idea. So
Mhm.
if you do want to introduce dogs together, let's say your friend got a new dog and consider going on walks together. Don't throw the dogs together. Just kind of be around each other and let the dogs slowly figure out who it is that they're around and how they feel about the other dog, and let them kind of come together on their own terms. If you've ever been in that position, my mom was one of those that like we'd go somewhere and I was like a young kid and she'd see like a pretty cashier or something and she would just kind of like play matchmaker, and it's weird, and
And you're like, I'm 6.
yeah. And well, but there's that feeling of like shoving you two together, and it's not comfortable
Yeah,
for either of you. So it
yeah,
has like an adverse effect, if anything.
yeah,
Next time
yeah,
I see
yeah.
that girl, I'm like embarrassed, even though I didn't do anything, And so
Right. Thanks, mom.
you're right, but what I'm getting at is like the way to get dogs to want to interact with other dogs is to give them give them that sense of, I'll do this on my own time. I'm not getting forced
Mhm.
into anything. I have power here, so there's really no
Exactly.
reason for me to be afraid.
Exactly. Create the circumstance, create the context for it to happen naturally.
Right.
And that's something too with human socialization. Um, you know, uh, Pass the puppy is a very common idea that's taught in dog training. And Ian Dunbar, who created it, like it's a great idea. However, when you deal with really cute puppies and you deal with some people, they treat that puppy like it's a rag doll. So be
Hmm.
very careful, right? Try and put your puppy on the ground. See if that puppy wants to interact with that person. Give that person treats and food to create motivation so the dog kind of comes out of his shell and wants to explore more social interactions. But if that dog is constantly being held and carried and picked up and tossed around like a rag doll, that's where we start crossing the line into overstimulation, over socialization, where what should be a very good experience can sometimes leave the dog with a bad taste in their mouth.
Right. I think that the best workaround to this, an easy way to simplify it, socialize your dogs young and start their obedience young. I mean, obviously, when we're talking like a really young dog, like, 13, 14 weeks, they're only capable of so much. But I'm talking something just as simple as this. And it makes perfect sense when you consider, again, dogs feeling like it's up to them whether or not they want to engage with something versus being forced to.
Mm-hmm.
Something as simple as this. Oh, can I pet your dog? Sure, hang on one second. And with food, get a little sit out of them if you can. And then when you release the dog, the person is the reward.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not
Mm-hmm.
getting bombarded. And not only that, but the person is now represents like, oh, I want that thing. I'll work for that thing. And so you frame things in a way that makes the person a positive experience. And the same could be said for other stuff. If dogs want to socialize with other dogs, I say that all the time. Like, it's not that they can't. Like, if they're willing to play, let's say the dogs know each other and we know that everything is good, of course, I'm going to give the dog this playtime. I'm not going to deny him, but I'm going to let him work for it first. Sit, good, okay, go for it, break.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that goes a really long way. Just let your dog do something super simple to earn this person as a reward, and you'll start framing them. It's not so much an invader as it is like, yes, I've earned, here's my friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, 100%. If we were going to break down like basic phases, before 6 months, your goal is to create healthy interest in interacting with things and exposing them to things that could be provocational if they were older, right? So that's stage one. Before 6 months, that's your goal. Around 6 months is where we have to really start putting focus on obedience, interactions, manners, how to interact with dogs, how to interact, or actually even before that, we work with dogs, but definitely with humans, teaching sit stays, down stays, all of these things to be able to help get our dogs to understand how the way that they treat humans is very different than the way they need to treat dogs.
Right.
And that is something that continues for till the end of that first year of that dog's life. Because dogs will have a lot of feelings, a lot of different hormonal changes, and we want to continue that. So exposure, do all of that before 18 weeks up to 6 months for certain things, but the manners and the self-control have to be implemented before the dog becomes a preteen. So that's would always be my recommendation.
Yeah, 100%. I love it, man.
Cool. Alrighty, guys. Well, we really hope that this podcast on socialization was helpful for you. Again, this is a deeper look on dog socialization. Please go ahead and add me and Mariano on Instagram. Mariano is his Untamed Dog Co. That's Untamed Dog Co. And go ahead and add me on Instagram. It's Canis Behavior. It's all one word. Be sure to check back with us because we're going to be dissecting a couple more topics in the dog training industry to have a little bit deeper look. Also, subscribe, leave a review, leave some comments. We really want to get to know your guys' feedback on this. And also share it. If you guys find this to be interesting, please share it with your family, your friends, other dog lovers, other dog trainers. And go ahead and email us at dogtrainerspodcast@gmail.com. So that way we can go ahead and interact with you guys more. We're really excited. We really appreciate all the feedback we've gotten thus far. And again, my name is Brent. That guy over there is Mariano. And we will see you guys back again for episode 14. See you then. Peace. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.